Hi, everybody. Welcome back to 2017. I hope you had a great, refreshing break. I have a few updates for you at this time. This update video will include observations in the school setting, updates on the Every Student Succeeds Act, and then some updates related to the file reviews that we're going through at this time. So the first area is observations in the classroom. And I have two situations that I'm commonly asked about, and my advice seems to be a little contradictory to each other. But this advice comes from a lot of conversations with other directors and attorneys. Um, and so it is my recommendation. There is not necessarily clear case law on this, but you can feel free to call me if you want to discuss this further. The first area where we get common requests for observations in the school setting is individuals that are interested in careers in special education. The reality is that a lot of people don't know about the varieties of careers that we have in a school setting. They are not even aware that we have occupational therapists, speech therapists, physical therapists, or even sometimes special education teachers, let alone knowing what those individuals do. And I do encourage that we allow those individuals to come in and observe. You would want to select appropriate times for them to do so. And primarily, you want to talk to them about confidentiality prior to them doing any observations. And I've attached a confidentiality statement that I encourage you to have them sign, and then the individual who has them observe should keep that on file for a couple of years after the individual does the observations. If you send them to me, I do keep them on file as well, but you don't have any obligation to send them to me. But I do encourage that. I think it is important for people to be aware of the different careers that we have available and what special education is about. However, my advice related to parents is a little different than that. The first advice that I have is that you follow the district policy. And typically what that is that parents have to notify the principal a couple of days prior to doing an observation. Then the principal would determine whether or not that was an appropriate time and place for parents to observe. For example, we wouldn't want a parent to come in during state testing and do an observation because that could be disruptive to that test setting as well as a test security issue. But then my advice to principals is that they not allow parents to observe within the special education setting. There is a lot of confidential information, not only about that particular student, but other students in special education as well. And parents coming in have a different intention, and they should not have access to that information about the other students in that setting. And so if parents want to know what's going on in special education, I would encourage that then the case manager would sit down with the parent outside of the school environment, the classroom setting when other students are not around, so that they can share exactly what is happening in that classroom. But I would not recommend that they observe within a special education setting. Some updates on the Every Student Succeeds Act, which was previously known as No Child Left Behind. The regulations are now out regarding this, and we can anticipate some changes coming. However, nothing at this time is changing related to our current practices. So nothing I'm going to tell you should change what you're currently doing. I just want you to be aware of some things that are going to be happening in the future and how we might anticipate some changes. The first thing is that previously 1% of students in each district could count as proficient on the MTAS. That has changed, and now the requirement is that only 1% of students in the state of Minnesota can take the MTAS. So that is quite a change. As I said, nothing has changed. The requirements as far as which students still take the MTAS, the decision-making process is still the same, but we can anticipate that there will be some changes coming around regarding which students can take the MTAS with the requirement that only 1% of students in the state of Minnesota can take the MTAS. As more information becomes available, I will let you know. We don't know what this will look like in the state of Minnesota. This is all fairly new. With that, there's also a requirement for the states to provide more information to parents about the options for testing and about accommodations that are available on the Minnesota Comprehensive Assessment. Again, at this time, the accommodations are still the same and the decision-making process would still be the same, but we will anticipate that probably with the 1% maximum on the MTAS that there will be more accommodations available in the future. And the state of Minnesota is looking for suggestions on how they can make this easier for parents to understand, what kind of guidance would be available. So if you have any suggestions, send them my way and I'd be happy to send them on to the Department of Education. Another area that we are seeing some things, I don't think this will impact us too much in Minnesota, but some school districts across the country are still encouraging parents to sign their children out of taking the state testing as an effort to avoid certain students taking state testing. And the new regulations really limit which districts will be counted as proficient if they have an excessive number of students that are not taking the statewide testing. So again, I do encourage, even though I had a parent that was really upset because she was not notified that she could sign her child out of state testing, I do not encourage you to notify parents that they have a right to sign their child out of state taking the MCAs. So nothing changing on the Every Student Succeeds Act at this time, but we are anticipating some things coming in the future. File reviews. First of all, we reviewed 49 files. Have a few more to go, but there were a few reasons why we couldn't get some of the files done. The coordinators should be coming up to you at this time, bringing you your file back, a yellow file review sheet, and then a pink correction sheet. The yellow file review sheets, my apologies, some of them look kind of chicken scratchy. When there were significant areas of concern, the coordinators and I did a lot of discussion, and it's not always real black and white or easy to determine. And so some of those had a lot of chicken scratch and changes on those. But be aware of that there was a lot of discussion that went with those. And then the pink correction sheet is my suggestion to you of how those need to be corrected. Sometimes as you sat down and talk with the coordinators, there's maybe a change within that, and that's fine. But you do need to get those corrections done. There's some fairly narrow timelines, and I need you to respond in a very timely manner for those because we have very narrow window to get all of those pieces corrected that we can correct. There were two types of errors that we found. There are non-substantial errors and then there are substantial errors. The non-substantial errors are things like maybe the goal was not measurable. It was a good goal, it just wasn't measurable. Or you forgot to put why the student will be serviced in a special education setting in the least restrictive environment. I've attached a letter that that you would send to the parents. You must revise the letter to indicate what you changed in the IEP or the evaluation report for that non-substantial error. I do strongly suggest that you call the parents to explain. Getting that letter in the mail can seem kind of cold and can lead to further relationship issues. And then you're going to make copies of that letter and any changes to the IEP or evaluation report. Put one copy in the file, one copy goes to the parents, and then I would get a copy as well. Most of those are due here January 15th, so we do need to move in a fairly quick manner on those. Now, there were some substantial issues as well. Some examples of what would be a substantial issue would be a student not meeting criteria, but the team determined that the student had met criteria, not having a goal when there was a clear need identified, or and not addressing that in some way, or not responding when a student was not making progress along the way. If a student is not making progress, we do have to address that at an IEP team meeting. So those situations that are more significant, I have specific guidance on your pink correction sheet. Overall file review results, I want to let you know we had some huge improvement. I realize that sometimes this paperwork seems very monotonous and it's very overwhelming, but we do need to continually strive to make sure that the parents and students are afforded their rights. And overall, I have to say this was huge improvement over 3 years ago. One of the things that does not make your job any easier, we were aware of, but it was very clear during monitoring, is that our students move around a lot. And that really makes our jobs very, very difficult. And it was very evident in the files that we reviewed. However, 9 out of 49 of the files had no citations at all. I have never had a time that we've reviewed files where we have had more than 3 perfect files. I will admit we reviewed a few less areas than what we've reviewed in the past, but overall, huge improvement, and that's quite amazing to see. Please be aware that the errors that are found are not personal. I don't expect that you're going to be perfect all the time. This is very confusing and it's very overwhelming. It's not personal if you make errors, so you don't need to get defensive. But I understand that it is a very frustrating process along the way. So I'm going to quickly go through some of the things that we found errors in so that we can all learn from those. The first area that we continually always have issues in is timelines. And I know these are difficult, but we want to continually strive. And I will say overall, there were significant progress in timelines. Evaluations, if a student is being reevaluated and you determine that the student should be getting services in a different area, we should address the criteria in a new area, you must meet initial criteria at that time. So for example, if a student is EBD and you switch them to LD, the student would need to meet initial criteria in LD. So each of those components would need to be addressed in that evaluation report. You have to be sure that the area of referral is actually being assessed. So if a student has emotional social issues and that is the concern that has been repeatedly discussed, that area must be assessed. We had an issue where there was an outside evaluation report and it was mentioned in the evaluation report, but it wasn't summarized. If the parent's providing additional information, you must be sure to summarize that in the evaluation report. If parents don't return data, you need to document in that evaluation report the specific attempts that you made to get that data or complete that parent interview, that kind of thing. So let's say you had the BASC on the permission and the parent does not return it. You're going to want to document with specific dates that you sent it home with the student on this date and this date. You sent it via the US mail on this date and this date. That you contacted the parent by phone on this date and this date. You want to show that you use a variety of ways because we're dealing with a variety of different cultures and socioeconomic status of our parents, and they don't all respond the same way. So you want to show a variety of different ways, a variety of different attempts, but you can't force them to get it in. However, it does tie into that first area that if the student is meeting initial criteria for EBD, you still would need to document that you observed that you got information about behaviors occurring in another setting. And just because the parent doesn't return that would not be an exception to that. You still need to meet that component of the criteria. Also, if a parent is requesting exiting a student from special education, you must get that request in writing from the parent. Team members. Again, we can't force parents to show up for IEP meetings, but we do need to show documentation that we did make efforts to get them to come to the meeting. We had 2 files where the parents did not come to the meeting, and the only documentation in the file was that there was a team meeting notice sent home 1 day prior to the meeting, and that would not be sufficient. I will be sending out some additional guidance as far as how you respond to these situations. because this is a high common issue in our area. Um, but you do need to document that you've made efforts to get them to come to the meeting. Same thing with students. Once a student is in grade 9 or higher, you must get them to come to the IEP meeting. But again, you can't force them to come. Um, you would want to make sure their name is on the team meeting notice. Even if a parent is saying they don't want them there, you need to explain to the parent that you have an obligation to invite them and give them the opportunity to participate. And then in that, in the present level of performance, put information about what the student likes and doesn't like, so that you show that the student was part of the process even if they weren't at the meeting. On the transition page, the post-secondary measurable goal, we still have a few people that are writing this more in a present level of performance format. You must follow this specific format. I know it seems kind of silly, but it is required. You must always put after high school or upon graduation, the student will, what will they do, and then whether they'll do it full-time or part-time. In the present level of performance, you have to identify how the disability impacts the students in the progress in the curriculum. Now, we did much better with current data relating to each of the goals. However, I will have to say, not all of the present levels of performance were real parent friendly. So we have provided you with a template, and I do encourage you to use that, as well as go back and look at that information. Put your mind in the mindset of a parent who doesn't understand education, doesn't know what Ames Web is, doesn't know what target means, doesn't know what number sense means, and really be very clear in that present level. For goals, also follow the format. It will save you time and time again. Be sure to put that the student will increase his ability to, what's the skill the student's going to do. Every time follow that format from, and then put either a percent or 8 out of 10, something that way, as well as the 2 point. There must always be numbers in that. Now, to help you with these last couple of slides, I've included a template for you. The present level of performance, here are the 2 required components. At a minimum, you must always have those 2 components. I do recommend that you use this template. It's much easier for parents to read and understand. And then in the goal, always follow the student will increase his skill, identify what that skill is from and to with a number. And then the post-secondary measurable goal, after high school, the student will, what will they do, full-time or part-time. I recommend that you print this off and put it beside your computer or save it someplace where you're going to have access to this document, because this can make your life much easier. Be sure you are following that format. These were common areas of citations. Another common area of citation was on the service page. These were the 3 areas that we had citations on. The first is on the service grid. You must identify specifically what the service is, not just the disability area. So we had a few files where it said emotional behavioral disability, 250 minutes a day. You have to break that down and identify which portion of that was on math skills, which portion of that was on social skills. As always, remember that that start date has to be 14 days after the prior written notice. In the para support box, if you identify that the student needs paraprofessional support, you have to put a job description. What specifically is it that the paraprofessional is doing to help support the student? And then in the least restrictive environment, there are 2 components. What is the student missing? And why do they need a special education environment? Just because they have a disability does not mean their services have to be provided in a special education environment. You want to specifically identify why the special education environment is provided. And then make sure that that least restrictive environment aligns with the service grid at the top of that page. And each of the services that are on the service grid need to have what the child is missing and why. Progress reports was our #1 area of citation. And overall, what I have to say is just do them. We did go into SPED forms if it was from this year and there was no progress report. I went into SPED forms to see if it was completed on there, because I never personally filed mine until the end of the year, but we still have a number of people that are just not doing progress reports. These are a vital piece. They're also great feedback to the students themselves. Number one research, one of the top research strategies that works is to make sure students know how they are progressing, have them be part of that feedback process. So be sure you're doing those progress reports. And it's very, very frustrating to have to cite somebody just because they didn't check adequate or inadequate progress. So be sure you're checking the box and putting data in that progress report. So there's a lot of information for you, and I want to make you aware that I put a variety of additional videos out on the Southern Plains website to lay out some of these more specifically. So if you go into learning opportunities and you go down to do process questions, I have added some new videos. One is for new students and how you handle new students. When do you have to do new evaluation? When do you not? Um, and how you make some of those decisions, as well as a handout that lays out some timelines related to that. Another video is on exiting students from special education, whether you're exiting them from one service or all of the services. If a parent requests, none of these have new information. They just really are answering some commonly asked questions. And then because we did have a lot of issues on the service page, I did a specific video on how to complete the service page, as well as attached a student, a sample of an IEP page for sample student. So these are some videos that are out there as resources for you. I will be directing some of you to specifically watch this if you watch one of these, if you had citations in a specific area. But these are commonly asked questions and are a good resource available for you. Also under learning opportunities, if you go in under update meetings for this past fall in-service, Megan had done a training for certified staff on employee engagement, particularly discussed a lot on millennials, and have had some continued conversations and requests for this information. So I asked her, a huge thank you to her for completing that video. So there, she recorded that presentation for you to be able to go back and watch that at your convenience. So there are some resources that I hope you find helpful. If you need additional resources, I am always looking for ways to help support you more. Please let me know. And again, thank you. I know that there's a lot of details that go into special education, and I appreciate the work that you do. Thank you so much for your time, and have a great new year.